Welcome to the Greed Geek Podcast with your host, Jason Fern.
What is up, everybody? Welcome to episode 8 of the Greed Geek Podcast. Today, we're going to discuss how to build wealth and a passive income stream through residential real estate. My guest today is a long-term friend of mine, Ryan Fenton. He was one of the earliest employees at Flow Sports, and he's a well-known track and field announcer for FlowTrack. Today, he's the director of global rights acquisition and partnerships at Flow. And all the while, he's been slowly building a real estate empire. Ryan, how's it going, my man?
It's going very good, Jason. I'm excited to be on with you. And I love that you're doing this stuff. I know you, like all of us, we all have our own little side hustles, and you do a lot. And a lot of the things that you do are, I think, I know you do things about history in your own community. You do things busy. Like this, yeah. But it's all I love the things that you do because it's all to help others, right? And share knowledge, and I love that.
That's what it's all about. Got to create value for other people. And you notice I'm wearing my Flow shirt today. Ryan and I both have one of these coveted names up on the wall jerseys because we've both been at Flow Sports for many years, long time.
Yeah, long time, over a decade for us.
So speaking of which, why don't you give us a little bit about your kind of non-real estate background, where you come from, what your journey's been like?
Yeah. I'm originally from the Northeast, grew up in New York, upstate New York, until I was about 8 years old. And then my dad got relocated with his job. We moved up to Portland, Maine. And so that's where I was through high school and love it there. That's really where I consider home. And so after high school, I'd gotten into running, I guess around the time of elementary school, middle school, and that helped me get into college and went down to Clemson in South Carolina. And most people probably know them for their football team over the last 5 or 6 years. It wasn't
they're pretty good.
Yeah, it wasn't. They weren't. They had won a title in 81. I got there in 2000. We weren't quite the team we are today. So it's nice to be a part of that. When I moved to Austin years later, no one really knew where Clemson was. Now, whenever I say Clemson, everyone's like, "Oh man, that's awesome!" So just that benefit I get from being associated, I'll take it. But yeah, I was down. Seminole, though. Yeah, it's okay. It's okay. Conference. We're in the same conference, so you got to have a little love.
Loyalty there. Yeah.
But yeah, I was at Clemson for 6 years. I did my undergrad and grad degree, ran for 5 years there, was a distance runner. And then afterwards went to Boston where I had my first job out of college and was working essentially behind a computer, no interactions with humans very often. And it was just not, it was just not me. And I was miserable. I was there for, a little less than 2 years and, just trying to figure out how I was going to do something different. And that's, you mentioned our connection through Flow Sports. That's in 2007, right around the time Flow Sports was starting and kind of saw what they were doing and just reached out to volunteer and help. And the CEO one of the co-founders at the time was coming up to Boston literally the next week. I offered him a place to stay. He stayed with me. I started, covering track meets. When I say covering track meets, literally going to track meets for 10 to 12 hours a day over the course of a weekend, and just filming and commentating track races and uploading them to the internet, which today seems very, obvious and common. But back then no one was doing it. And so that just consumed my world, at work, outside of work, just getting prepared for that coming weekend's event. And so within 3 months, quit my job. The founders of the company asked me if I'd come to Austin, and there I went. So that was 13 years ago. And I've been actually just hit my 13-year anniversary 2 days ago. So been in Austin ever since.
Yeah, I mean, obviously in the early days, you guys were hustling, like sleeping on floors, all kinds of crazy stuff. But over the years, you've done a lot of other things with the company as the company's grown. You've done some, product management. With me, we did that together. A lot of long nights with that. And then now you're into rights management, so negotiating deals with big partners out there.
Yeah. Negotiating media rights deals. So, I oversee a lot of our endurance sports. So running, swimming, cycling, anything in the weightlifting, CrossFit space, and then even work within kind of college and national governing bodies. So there's a lot of different partners we deal with, and my chunk is only a portion of that. So, but yeah, it's been an adventure. We were a very grassroots and started, just doing local events, and now we're partnering with folks like the Tour de France and competing against the NBCs and the ESPNs of the world. So the times have changed, and there's a lot at stake. So it's fun and never a dull moment, and trying to continue to grow, help the company grow and do more things. So
a trend I noticed with you is that you do a lot of jobs that you have no business doing. No background in journalism, no background in product management, no background in rights negotiations, and no background in real estate. How does that work?
I mean, it's interesting, and some may say, and even sometimes I may say to a fault, like especially at Flow Sports. I mean, I started when, as you said, it was the three co-founders and myself living in a 2-bedroom house. And so the connection that I have with the company is much different than if I had taken a job somewhere and at an established company. And so my kind of mission and view of my role at the company was, as we grew and we started going into places where we didn't have someone to fill a role, I wanted to be kind of a solution, right? And help where I could. And so, so in some ways I kind of put my own, some of my own personal accomplishments and kind of the things that I built up over the years aside to help the company. And that was my choice. And so, that fortunately, we acquired a company called MileSplit, which Jason, you and Don Rich founded. And that was one of those times where it was a time for me to pivot within the company and oversee essentially a merger of two organizations. And that was challenging in many ways, but so rewarding. And honestly, the work that you and I did together, you mentioned up till 3-4 a.m. Doing things we probably had no business doing because just lack of experience, but we were just, trying to make it happen and improve improve the company, improve the experience for all the fans and the communities that we serve.
So a lot of it is kind of hustle and fake it till you make it. Was it the same for you with real estate? Like how do you jump into doing real estate with no background in it?
Probably like a lot of people, thinking it's time to buy your first home. You've rented for so long and it's kind of time to pull the trigger, and you have that thought in your mind, I'm just throwing this rent money away. I should put it into something I'm going to own.
Yeah.
And for me, it started a little before that. When I was in Maine, I had a friend of mine who I mentioned I ran track. And so there was a runner a few years older than I was, one of the best runners in the state. And years later, out of college, we reconnected and formed a friendship. And at that point, he was pretty heavily into real estate and had built up a pretty decent portfolio. And I don't even think I realized to what extent at that time. But had a really cool story. He, had a college loan and used that money to get his first duplex, and then kind of that got him started, right? And so that spiked my initial interest in real estate. And
so that was really early on then.
Yeah, this was probably 2005, 2006, and so in 2007, I started looking at property when I lived in Boston, and I looked in my hometown of Portland, Maine, and almost pulled the trigger on a 3-unit in downtown Portland. And then Flow Sports came around and I had the opportunity to move to Austin. And so real estate got put on the back burner at the time. And so it really was a couple years before I started looking again, because my life at that point was traveling every week. And so real estate was not even a thought, and it just was focused on what we were doing with the company. It was a startup. And so that was the grind right then. And so it wasn't for another probably 2 or 3 years until I started looking again. So that was in 2010, and still just on the road so much. So didn't really look serious, put it off to the side again, and then came back around once my schedule and kind of the company grew to a point where I wasn't on the road every weekend. Right. It was about 2013. And that's when I started looking seriously and kind of looking weekly. And the market at that point were, 5 years after the housing market crash. And so, real estate in Austin was picking up. It was getting very competitive. So I looked for a full year before I could buy a place. And, I think I started probably like most first time home buyers, where you're very picky. You don't really know what you want. You think, but then you start going to see things and you learn along the way of.
So was this a home, the home that you were going to live in first, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And so the investment side hadn't really kicked in yet. And so that through that first year, I think what I learned the most being in Austin was get less picky and get ready to move quick, because the market at that time, I mean, I think we all know the market's pretty crazy now throughout the country, but even then there were properties that I could not even look at unless I was under contract. And we were putting offers, 20,000 over the asking price and not even getting a call back. And so it was super competitive even. And as a first time home buyer, I had no idea what was going on. It was really frustrating. And I think it was about 10 or 11 months into that process where I said to my agent at the time, it was November. So I said, hey, Thanksgiving's coming up, Christmas is after, let's just kind of put a pause on this and come back after the new year. And I went for a run that next day and checked my phone, and a house popped up on the market. And it was in an area of town where most people said you shouldn't, no one really lives over here. You don't go over here. And price point was super low. Square footage was really high. And I was just like, you know what? I'm just going to go take a look. So I go pull into the neighborhood and find the house. And the selling agent is putting out an open house sign. And so I was like, well, I might as well go in. So I went in. It looked great. It was 4-bedroom, 3-bathroom house, and drove around the neighborhood. It looked cool. And I was just called the agent. I said, hey, false alarm yesterday. I think we should put an offer on this place. So we did. And we lost the house. We didn't get it. And a week later, I was in Orlando, Jason, at the Bowerman Award, awards competition that I helped host. And my agent called me about a week later, and she said, hey, got some news. The buyers had to back out because they had a family emergency and the sellers want to go with you. And I said, let's do it. And so, at that point I was going to Maine for Christmas. So I closed on my first house. I wasn't even in the state. And that's how I got started. And where the investment side quickly kicked in within a matter of weeks was I listed that house on Craigslist before I even finished the purchase process. And by the time that I was going to move into the house, I had 3 bedrooms rented. And after all expenses, because, utilities and lawn care and whatever else was included, I was cash flowing like $365 a month. So it was a little over $4,300 a year. And I had just been paying about $1,650 in rent for the previous year.
Yeah.
So almost 20 grand. And so that was a $24,000 swing in my life. And I was like, wow,
holy cow,
I need to do this again. And I need to do it really quickly.
So you were living in 1 bedroom and renting out the other 3. Is that what you're doing?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
So some people, if Bigger Pockets is a real estate platform, a lot of people follow. And so I think they've coined the phrase, the house hack. And so I think, for some people, they might call that a house hack. You buy and rent out the rooms and live in it and then move on to the next. So
was that in South Austin is where that was?
Yeah, you could say southeast Austin. So just south of, if anyone's familiar with Austin, Town Lake or Lady Bird Lake that runs through the center of the city. It's on the south side in an area called Montopolis.
Okay. So you're in this house renting out the rooms. And then you go to buy your second house. Am I right that your second house was in the same neighborhood? It
was a street over. Yeah.
Yeah. So how did you kind of? I mean, that's a big commitment, right? You're going into this into a lot of debt. Then when you kind of take on another home, was that scary?
It wasn't. I think once I saw real estate in action and how it literally changed overnight the way that it affected my life, just with the amount of really financially how the swing had shifted things so drastically, so quickly, it gave me a lot of confidence. And I think at that time, part of, one of the benefits for me is I didn't overanalyze. And some people, I started talking to other people and friends of mine that did this, and they're like, what's the ROI? What's it? And I'm just like, I didn't even know what they were talking about, because I didn't look at it that way.
Yeah.
I looked at it very simple. I said, if I had to rent this out in a worst case scenario, would I be able to cover the mortgage? Right. If I know what the rents are now, but let's say something happens, rents drop significantly, do I feel comfortable that I could cover this? And the answer was always yes.
Okay.
If I kept it really simple.
And you weren't worried about like not being able to rent it, like vacancy and all that kind of stuff?
No. I mean, in Austin at that time, it was less about if you could rent it. It was more in the area I was, how much I could rent it for.
Okay.
And Austin was getting more expensive. And so, the area I was in is an area, like I said, and people said, oh, people don't live there. That's not where you would buy, but it's still very close to downtown. And so as downtown and other areas started getting very pricey, this was a great alternative for folks. So I always had a really positive experience in that area, and ended up, that's where I actually invested a lot.
So then did you move into the second home after that?
I did. Yeah. So that ended up being my strategy is, I would buy a home, I would live in it, I would rent out the other rooms, and I would, essentially be living for free, and in a lot of cases making money. And so that allowed me to save very quickly. My paycheck from work wasn't going towards a ton of expenses. And so it allowed me to kind of build up capital to get to the next project. And the benefit of doing that for me, and others that do it, is that when you buy a home as a primary residence, you're only required to put 5% down.
Okay.
So I told you that example where there was a $24,000 swing in my world in 1 year. Well, if you're looking at that time, the houses I was buying were around $200,000, $250,000. So you're talking about $10,000 to get into a home. Yeah. And I just saved myself 24 grand by buying my first house. Right. And so that ability to save money happened super quick. And so, essentially you learn a lot through the process and kind of how to navigate that. But essentially you if you're buying a primary residence, you need to wait about a year before you can do that again. And so that was a year for me to save up money. And then I was ready to move pretty quickly to the next project.
So were they fixer uppers where you moved in, were fixing them up, or were they kind of, already, in good shape?
Most of the ones that I think actually almost all were in pretty good shape. So there's only one house really I've remodeled fully. There's houses now along the way. We've updated floors. If there was carpets, you put in hard surface or things like that. Yeah. But I was fortunate where most of the houses that I was buying had either already been updated or were in pretty good condition, built in the last 10 years. And so they weren't in terrible shape and ready to move in right when you got it. So
last count I heard is that you were at 11. How many houses are you at now?
Yeah. So I've right now I own and manage a portfolio of about 15 properties in Austin. 11 of those are mine. 4 of those are family members that I help. If you're talking, most of those are single family homes with a couple duplexes. So of those 11, I think there's about 16 rental units within that. So that's just been pretty fortunate in terms of kind of the area I was able to invest in and get in. I think the area I started in was an area that again was overlooked, and so that's not the case at this point. It's an area that's developing now, and a lot of bigger projects are going in over there, and so the numbers today don't make quite as much sense as they did when I started. So yeah, just good time,
So then have you moved to other areas that maybe are now overlooked, or are you still in the same area when you're investing?
I like the area I'm in. I've gone to other areas as well. Some a little further south, some a little further north, but no, I wouldn't say there are any areas that are overlooked. It's hard to find that in Austin nowadays. I mean, every area is, the values are going up and to make the numbers work nowadays, it is hard. If you're looking at if cash flow is one of your goals.
So you're married now. I doubt you're still doing the, moving into a house and living there and, that kind of thing anymore, right?
Yeah, it's a little harder.
Yeah.
I mean, that's one of the things that I would say is that for me, my life allowed me to do that at the time. If I was a single guy and didn't have a ton of responsibility outside of work and whatever it was I needed to look after personally, and so it allowed me to do that pretty flexibly. And
so how many times did you do that kind of flip, or not flip, but you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. It was the 2014 was the first. Was January 2014 is the first house I closed on, and I probably moved. Let me say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I think there's about 6 houses I lived in over a span of about 4 or 5 years.
That must have been exhausting to pick up your life and move so frequently. I mean,
yeah, it was. And in the beginning, I was in, my first one, I moved across the street, right? Essentially one block over. And so, you're like, oh, I'll just move my own stuff, and you're doing trips back and forth. And you quickly realize I found some movers that through a friend, and every time I moved, I just called them. I said, hey, moving this day. I'd pack everything up. They'd come, box it, or pack it up, move it over. Yeah. So there's things like that definitely alleviated some of the stress of the move, that you find it's worth the value of paying some movers to help you when you're doing it so frequently.
So I got the spreadsheet up here.
Oh, look at you.
So I'm jealous of you, because I wanted to get into real estate, years ago. I had a little money in the stock. I put it all in the stock market. I mean, I've done it right in the stock market, but I was doing all these calculations and how many years is it going to take to get my money back and all this kind of stuff. And I always kind of scared myself out of it. I'm just curious, like, have you gotten more sophisticated and started, here's these big spreadsheets of, this discounted cash flow, and this, you look on cash return. You talk about bigger pockets. This is what bigger pockets is going to teach you. Yep. So I'm just curious, have you gotten more sophisticated over the years? Or are you still kind of like, hey, if I can cover the mortgage?
I've gotten more sophisticated. I mean, ROI is something I look at, but I actually subscribed to Bigger Pockets, I think a year or two ago, and just did it for that year, and kind of looked in some of the spreadsheets, and it was good and it was helpful, but I also found that it got me overthinking. Mm-hmm. And I was there's so many different things you can put in there, right? And I think for me, I know the market in Austin, at least where I invest, and I kind of know how my the properties I have operated and how they've performed, and so I have some confidence to be a little more flexible with how I look at the numbers. And so I do have ways I look at it, but I don't. The spreadsheets I have, I think I do a pretty, I guess you could say a pretty deep dive into really monitoring kind of the financials and expenses on the properties that I have. And so when I go into a deal, I'm pretty confident that if, the cash on cash return makes sense at a certain point, and I understand the ROI, then I'm pretty comfortable with knowing you have to go at some point. You have to go into real estate knowing there's going to be expenses. Yeah. And so whether it's an HVAC or a water heater or a roof, I mean, those things are just going to happen. Yeah. And so you just have to be. When you get to a certain point, you just have to be prepared for that, right? And have reserves kind of handy, so it's not a scary thing, and you just know that's kind of part of what you're signing up for, and you're prepared for that. So
one of the things that's always scared me away from it is I'm not a handy person. I can write any kind of software application you ever wanted, but I can't fix. My wife builds the furniture if we buy something from IKEA or whatever, right? Are you hands-on? Do you get into the houses and fix the toilets and whatever?
Not a lot.
Okay.
I say that this morning, there's a property that I'm turning over, and some new tenants are moving in. And so I was over there this morning replacing light bulbs and changing locks on doors. And so there's some basic things that I can do. And, if someone doesn't have hot water when they first move in, I can kind of understand and pinpoint and stuff with saying, there's certain things you kind of learn along the way that you can save yourself a couple $100 from calling someone to go over and check it out when you know it's a simple solve.
Yeah.
But we, an example of where I quickly found that I value having someone come do the work for me is, there was a toilet issue at a house, and I think it was running, and I needed to replace something, and so I got the parts, and I can't even tell you the name of all the parts, so that kind of gives you the extent of my knowledge here. But there's like a rubber piece I had to put in the toilet, and did all this stuff, drain the water, put it back together, filled the water back up, and I was like, man, I am a handyman. I can do this, right?
Yeah.
And I flushed the toilet, and all the water just spilled out onto the floor. And I was like, I have no idea what I did wrong here. And apparently the toilet I had at the house was one that wasn't a standard size. And so I just bought the kind of standard replacement part. So anyway, it was a very simple learning experience to say, I'm just going to get the plumber over here to make sure this is done correctly. So I've built up a team of folks that do work for me in different aspects. If it's plumbing, electric, a handyman, fences, and so you have those people that you can trust and call on when things come up.
And they give you a good price. You can count on it because you're going to be recurring business for them.
Yeah. And refer. I always refer my friends that need help to the people I work with, and so I try to look out for them as best I can and get them more business.
What about as far as the actual, like, working with the tenants and collecting the money? Like, I assume you do that yourself and you don't use a rental management company?
Yeah, correct.
Okay. So is that a burden, and what are some of the stresses with that?
So in the beginning, it was more of a burden, I think. And because I was acquiring properties so quickly, when you went from 1 to 2, it's not that big of a deal. When you go from 2 to 3, it's pretty manageable. Then I think I went from 3 to 4, and number 4 had 2 units. And so now I was at 5 units.
Okay.
And then each house has multiple tenants, right, within it. And so like that builds up pretty quickly. And so you got questions coming in, text and email, and people are paying through PayPal and Venmo and check. And so you have all these different things coming in. And so fortunately for me, the realtor I have now, I've been working with for a number of years, and he also is an investor, and he's been someone I've been able to kind of lean on as I've scaled up. And so one of the things we talked about is property management software. And so I use a service called Buildium.
Okay.
And so through that, I think that there's probably a lot of functionality I don't even use fully, but I mean, the biggest thing that I'm able to do is create a tenant portal for the tenants. So they have a place they can go online and pay rent. They can submit any maintenance issues, all those things. And so that rent now all comes in one place in the same way. And then maintenance issues come in. It's, people are less texting you or calling you at all hours. They kind of know there's a process, and they go through here, and that job gets assigned, and they can kind of see the process of it getting worked on and know when it's scheduled. And so it gives them more kind of transparency and communication through the process when things come up. And then the big thing that it does too is, I was fortunate where my parents, they retired and moved to Austin. And so, so I mentioned I help manage some other properties. And so my dad has some rental properties in Austin. And so he and I now work together, where it was very easy for me to plug his property into the software. And now he's helping with some of the day-to-day, where, I may focus on kind of rent collection and when houses turn over, and he's focusing more on the day-to-day maintenance stuff that comes in. So once that system was set in, it was really easy for me to assign another manager, and for him to now get the notifications and start and kind of pick up and run with it. Now,
is that a service that just charges you like by the number of properties you have, or?
Yeah, I think the way Buildium works is there's it's a monthly subscription cost to use the software, and it's a certain price when you're up to X amount of properties, and then if you have more than that, then the price goes up. So, yeah.
Well, the other thing I'm curious about is, when you have that many properties, you got to make sure you have the right tenants. And is there not a lot of due diligence you have to do before you agree to let somebody move into one of your houses?
Yeah, there's a lot of due diligence. And this is another aspect where that software has helped made that pretty efficient. But there's, you're doing background checks and credit checks, and there's a rental application, and then you're checking past landlord with past landlords on these tenants. You have to verify employment and income. So there's a number of steps, and I think in the beginning, I was probably less diligent about that because, again, I didn't have as many properties in the beginning, and you have less tenants. And in some cases, it was people I knew, and so you could be a little more flexible. But then there was a situation where, I did actually go through the process, and I didn't call on all the references or the past landlords, and there was some pretty significant dings on the credit and some of the background check stuff. And you try to help people out and be as flexible as you can. And so there's always a story that comes with why something is maybe not coming out and looking, squeaky clean. And so I was trying to help this tenant out and allowed them to move in. And I mean, almost immediately it just became a very, very big headache in terms of collecting rent and communication and all that. And so that 12-month lease was very challenging. Okay. And I ended up getting, actually was very fortunate where I ended up collecting all the rent throughout the year, but say it's April 1st, it maybe in some cases took me till April 24th and a series of 3 or 4 trips and meeting up with the tenant and at the bank and to get that money. And so it was just very time consuming. And so again, that's where when you go into something like real estate, these things are in place for a reason. And you sometimes try to cut the corner or maybe be flexible and try to help someone that seems like they're in a tough situation. But you always have to remember that that's going to come back on you. And your time, as so many people say, is your most valuable asset. And it really can throw off your world when, especially if you're the one managing it and you have situations like that come up. So it was a pretty important learning experience for me, and just really reinforced how important those kind of initial stages of that tenant checking is.
So was that your worst situation? Because I mean, a lot of people that do this, I hear horror stories about, we had this tenant, they trashed the house, they ripped out all this stuff. And I mean, have you had any really bad things happen like that?
That was the worst, I would say. And again, it was just such a time consuming thing for 12 months. And so, there's things that happen. I mean, I've had tenants that haven't moved out on time, and you're in situations where you have new tenants with a new lease starting and you're trying to figure out how to navigate that. And that's only happened 1 or 2 times, but those things come up. In terms of, damage to the property, I haven't had any major issues like that. There's definitely situations where maybe you have a tenant in there for 2 or 3 years and you quickly know that they have not cleaned that place in 2 or 3 years. And so, there's some significant work in cleaning and painting and those kind of things. But again, I think you have to go into it knowing that that's part of what you're signing up for. I may have a tenant that's going to kick holes in the wall at some point. And I that's part of this. Right. And it's, so I think when you have that understanding and that is a possibility, it helps make it less stressful. It doesn't alleviate the stress, right? Because there's a lot of work to be done. But the kind of shock or surprise of it isn't there. And that's, I think, what probably causes a lot of people to either not jump in or stop. Right. Yeah. Or maybe they got 1 or 2 properties and they had a bad experience and they're just like, man, this isn't for me.
Now, do people put down a deposit so you at least cover some of those kind of expenses?
Yeah. So everyone, I mean, in Austin and at least in our market, there's a security deposit. Normally it's equal to 1 month's rent in the way that we do it. And so there's some protection there, but again, it's time and it's work. And the more that you have to do, the more time and the more money, and the deposits don't always cover some of the things that were left behind when people, leave trash or leave things behind that you have to haul off and those kind of things.
So Ryan, I'm curious, what has been maybe your biggest success story where you've come in, you've got a house at a great price and made a really good profit on it? Anything come to mind?
I mean, my first house, I would say. I mean, that's a pretty easy one. I think, again, it was just once I did that, and I say that because it was one that I was like nervous about in the area and all these things. I told you I was listening to from other people, but
Mhm.
you know, the returns that I've gotten on that house through the rent, through the appreciation, you know, there's so many things that you can do with property that you don't realize when you first start. And even when you talk to somebody, it's hard to explain everything, right? But through, you know, the appreciation and the ability to refinance and do a cash out refinance. I mean, I've made well more than my money back on that house. And so
Mhm.
the returns on that home at this point are kind of infinite. And so that house has allowed me to buy other properties through doing things like a cash out refinance. And so, yeah, it's significant. I think it's probably, if not at this point, it might be more than double in value from when I bought it in 2014.
Yeah.
So it just, yeah, it was, that one was, again, kind of set me off. And I would say that was my biggest success
Ha-
for a number of
Have you
reasons.
have you just held on to all your properties and just rent them out, or there's some that you also sold?
I've not sold to this point.
Okay.
No. And people ask me, my wife asked me, you know, hey, are you going to sell? When are you going
Mhm.
to sell? And I look at it, I try to look at it from an investment mind, right? And I
Mhm.
say, I, I will, it's investment mind or a family emergency mind, I guess I should say. Um, you know, you have money in the stock market, Jason. So like, if you had money in a stock that was doing really well,
Why would you sell?
would you sell it?
Yeah. No.
And so the answer is, I will sell it if I can take that money and put it in something else that will perform even better.
Right.
Right.
Okay.
And so that's the way I look at it right now. And so there may be a time where that happens, or, you know, maybe there is a point where you kind of graduate and are looking at bigger, more significant projects. And maybe that's a time, and maybe it makes sense. But again, it's you kind of run the numbers. It's not an emotional decision or a decision of, oh man, it's too much work. I think I would first say, all right, how much would it cost to get someone else to manage this? And let's
Yeah.
run those numbers. And then again, and until there's a reason to put that money elsewhere, or we have something come up in our family where it's money that we need in a situation, like, yeah, the plan would be to hold and for the moment.
Now, are you diversified in your investments? Like, do you have money in the stock market? Do you have money in crypto? Do you have money other places? Or are you like, I'm all in real estate?
Um, Significant portion for me is in real estate. That was kind of the avenue I found first that really just kind of was all consuming for me when I started. And so, um, I've been, you know, I think there's things like Roth IRAs and 401ks that I, you know, have money in. And so some of the traditional stuff,
Yeah.
I've been less involved in the stock market. Again, my focus has been more on how do I build up on the real
Yeah. If it
estate
works,
side.
why
And
not?
yeah, and so that's been a main portion. I've got a very small amount invested in crypto. I think I invested that at like the top of the market in 2018, January 2018.
That's fine now.
And yeah, and it bombed very quickly, like within a
Yeah.
week. And so it was a month or two ago. I literally hadn't looked at it in about a year, and I was like, wow, I'm finally positive. That's good.
Yeah.
So, hindsight, I probably should have put more in when it bombed. So
Everybody says that. Yeah.
yeah. So
Yeah.
but yeah, so real estate's been the main vehicle, and I think now we're at a point where we're starting to look at how do we diversify and start planning in
Yeah,
different
I was
ways.
gonna ask, like, from here, like, you have 15. Are you going for 30, or you're like, hey, I'm good here, or what is your goal?
I think the goal at this point is just in investing in a way, whether it's real estate, whether it's stock market. And this is where we're actually actively, my wife and I are actively going through this process and kind of learning in other ways we can make investments, is just how do we grow our overall portfolio, right? And our net worth. And that's kind of the one of the numbers that we look at. And when we think about what we want to do with our lives, when we want to retire, it's kind of the bigger picture of how are the decisions we're making today helping that picture down the road, and that net worth that will allow us to kind of live the life we want to live.
Yeah. So are you I don't know if you've read like Rich Dad Poor Dad. Are you like an ascriber to like I'm going to build these personal like passive income streams? Is that like really the ultimate goal?
That's it. Yeah, that's one of the goals for sure. Yeah, and I've read Rich Dad Poor Dad. It's a great book. I really enjoyed it. And I actually have my wife read it because I don't think I'm always the best at explaining why I do the things that I do. And I read that book and I said this will be a very good like eye-opening way to get into my mind and help you understand how I look at things. But yeah, investing into assets and all those kind of things. So how do you build up passive income streams? And again, for me, real estate's been one of those, and the one that I've focused on more recently, obviously in the last few years. So yeah, those are things that we're trying to figure out how to grow and how to get to the point where we're, the phrase I think everyone likes when you start getting into this is financial freedom, right? How do you get to that point and you're able to really focus on the things that you love? It could be your job and your family and all those things, but just where you're doing things with essentially no stress, and you're not worrying about what happens if a situation comes up that you weren't prepared for. So I think that's really the ultimate goal.
Yeah. So you mentioned your dad's got into the action with you. Is Jess also, does she go out to the negotiations with you, or is she getting involved as well, or it's like your thing?
Yeah, no, we've all kind of got involved. Jess has bought a few properties along the way before we got married. My dad bought a few properties when he moved to Austin. It's been fun to work kind of with our family on that, because I think it got to a point, my parents were really excited when I bought my first house. And they were a little excited when I bought the second house, but it happened really quickly, and they were like, okay, all right. And then when the third came and the fourth came, they were like, hey, what, are you sure you know what you're doing? And it was one of those, it was really a kind of a significant moment for me in my life where, your parents started to doubt the things you were doing, and I had to educate them. It was something that they had never experienced. And so, I try to be very open. My dad's a numbers guy, so I try to be open and show him, all the things that I'm tracking and looking at, and making sure he knows that, hey, I'm going into this with a lot of knowledge and understanding. I'm not flying by the seat of my pants. And so when they retired and moved down here, it was about, I think 4 years ago or so. My dad was retired and was trying to figure out where he was going to put his money, and he had 401k, and he had been in the stock market and was just trying to see if there was other ways to do it. And so I introduced him. He started looking at property, I remember, and I introduced him to my agent, and he was a little reluctant. My dad is a very loyal man, and so he had started working with an agent, and he's like, I started with this woman, and I'm gonna kind of honor that. And I said, well, listen, just humor me here, right? This is the son now trying to convince the dad of something that he thinks will benefit his father financially. And so it was just a kind of the first time I'd been in that position. And I said, just humor me here and just meet my agent out for lunch. If if you like it, great. If you don't like it, that's fine too. Just I would love for you to have a conversation with him. And he went to lunch, and he said, oh my gosh, that's amazing. I'm going to start working with him tomorrow. He was so knowledgeable, right? And that's where I feel fortunate. My agent is really good, and I think a lot of people maybe have bad experiences with agents, or just some agents are just not as knowledgeable as other, and so some people have the view that agents aren't really valuable. There's they're just kind of get you into the house, and they submit a contract or an offer for you, and that's kind of the extent of their role. But when you find a real good agent, and they understand investment, and they understand ways that you can work with your money, and how you can work with a lender in a better way, all these things, it just puts so much more power in your hands when you're trying to win deals, especially in a competitive market. And so it was cool to see my dad quickly see that, and he kind of jumped on the train and got 2 properties pretty quickly. So yeah, it's been fun to see family get involved as well.
Well, now if we still have some viewers with us 45 minutes into this, they must be pretty interested, and one would assume that they might want to get started themselves, right?
Yeah.
So Let's turn it to like speaking that person out there. Like they're like, okay, I'm ready to get started. What would you tell them? What are some of the first steps?
I would say, try to start building your network and learning the process. I have so many friends that want to, like, over the years that have said, "Oh man, I want to get a house and I want to try to get an investment property, but it's just the time isn't right. I'm not ready to do it right now." And I always point to, it took me a year to buy my first property, right? And Jason, we were talking, it took me 6 years to get to the point where I was actually looking seriously to buy my first property. And then it took me a year to actually get the property under contract, right? And so there's so much unknown. And so when you're actually ready to buy, you have the down payment, you kind of financially in a position to do it. Most people, that's when they start learning of what they're supposed to do. And while that's happening, you're kind of missing deals. And when you go through the process, you have to learn the things you're actually comfortable with. There's a whole process of actually learning what properties you think you like, and then what you actually end up buying are very different, right? So there's so many things to learn. And so what I would say is start building your network, like reach out to lenders, start some relationship with lenders, have them run numbers for you, right? Hey, I'm interested in buying a property. Can you give me a pre-approval? What do you need for that? And start understanding what you could actually get approved for, right? And talk to the lender about the things they're looking at and what they need to see. And so that process, because that becomes a major part of the home buying process, right? And or the investment process. And so I would also, when you get to that point, I think one of the other things I would recommend is, a lot of people, they're like, oh, I was pre-approved for a $300,000 home, right? And that doesn't really mean anything. What you really need to understand is the monthly expenses that you're going to incur, right? Like,
and not just the mortgage, right?
Yeah, there's mortgage, there's taxes and insurance. I mean, at the very basic level, those things.
On top of that, right?
Yeah, but at the very basic level, know what your full payment that you're guaranteed to make is through taxes, insurance, and your mortgage, and make sure that those numbers make sense in your world, right? And maybe you're approved for 400,000, but really you should only be going after a house that's 250 or whatever the numbers might be. And so understand what that is, so you go into it with a clear picture of what you need, and even your down payment. I bought my first house and I thought I had to put 20% down. I didn't realize I only had to put 5%. And so it wasn't until very far along the process, once I was under contract, where I said, hey, do I have to put 20% down? And someone said, I forget who I talked to, it might've been my agent at the time. And they just said, no, but no one went a step further and said, no, you actually only have to put 5% down. So I put 15% down.
Okay. Yes.
So I'm just, in hindsight, I could have saved a few $1,000.
No, you still did all right though.
Yeah. So, but but it's, again, just things that you don't realize you don't know. And so waiting to actually get a house under contract to start learning these things makes it pretty stressful. And
I was just going to say, one of the things that impressed me earlier that you said was, just like in the stock market, like there's a big, broad stock market, and there's no way that you're going to know more than the investors across the whole market. But you can find this little niche in the market where maybe you have a little advantage because, it's software, and I know software a little bit better. So to me, it sounded like you zoomed in on this neighborhood that you learned really well, this part of Austin, where you're like, I see opportunity here where maybe other people are overlooking it. So I don't know if that's part of the equation as well, finding a place where you know it really well. Maybe you study the market in a certain area for a while first. Is that, you think?
Yeah, I think, well, I just realized people were overlooking it, right? And my first 2 purchases were really successful for me. And I said, if I can find more over here, that's what I'm going to do. And I think it's more than half of the properties I own now are in that area. And so again, I just tried to move as quickly as I could, because I saw the market going up and things were good deals. And I saw more people moving in that area. I saw more development starting to happen in that area. And I said, it's still overlooked. And so if you're in a market where you can find that, then yeah, if you can do it, take advantage of it as quickly as you can. But it's hard to find that, right? And like I said, in Austin, there's not many of those spots anymore that allow you to get into something and cash flow, unless you're trying to put more money down, and then you can always find a way to cash flow. But for me, I was trying to figure out how can I put as little money out of pocket in to get a property and still have good returns and keep moving.
And where do you go to estimate what rental rate you think you can get, so you can make sure that your rent is going to cover the mortgage or whatnot?
I mean, I always first go to my realtor. It's very easy for realtors to run comps. My realtor also owns rental properties himself, so he not only can he pull the information, but he's also in the market. And then I'm obviously in certain areas I'm in as well, and have a pretty good idea what rents are. So I think it's just asking. There's the Zillows out there that have the rent estimator. Sometimes those are accurate, sometimes they're not. And ultimately, all it takes is one person that needs your place at a price that they like, and that may not align with, I've had, and I say this because I've had properties where Zillow says, hey, it's $1,500 and I rented it for $2,100. And so I would just ask the questions, check with your realtor, talk to other people if you know other people that are investors in the area that have experience, what are they renting things for? And you can get that information a number of different ways. Okay.
And you mentioned you're a subscriber to Bigger Pockets. Are some of these communities, is that really beneficial? Do you think somebody just starting out should kind of join these communities to learn from others?
I think it exposes you to a lot. I think that I would definitely look at it and find the things that you can get a lot of answers to a lot of questions that you have. So they're valuable in that way. I would caution to get too wrapped up in the numerous ways you can analyze and what I would say is overanalyze things, to try to make the perfect deal. Because part of real estate is you just got to start getting going, and you may make a mistake or two along the way, but I think you want to find a good deal to get started. That's obviously ideal, because that kind of gives you a good first experience and gives you some confidence to move into something else. But don't, understand what try to understand what you're looking at, and don't overdo it is what I'm saying. There's so many.
But you did say earlier that, you analyze okay, what's the worst case scenario? So just make sure that you're still covered in that worst case scenario.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. And that was the comfort for me, right? At the time, I was just like, can someone else cover the mortgage payment on this if I'm renting it out? Right. And where I'm not going negative. And so that was kind of my guiding compass. And that was talking to my agent about what rental rates were, and has he seen, what has the market seen over the last 10 years? Are there times where the rental rates have dipped, and, kind of understanding what would actually lead to something like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I think, going back to the question on things like Bigger Pockets, and one of the things that is actually pretty valuable is they have forums on there. And so when you have questions, you can post on the forums, and I've only done it a few times, but I think I said, hey, if you guys had, I think my question was something like, if you had $100,000, how would you invest it right now? And what market would you look at? And I had 50 or 60 people that were just like, and it was great. It was a great conversation. It actually, some people were talking about not just buying property, and it was a whole number of things that I had never even heard of. And so it kind of opened my mind to, wow, there's all these things that you can do. Yeah. But again, that's where I caution and say, for me, I've been very focused on kind of what I'm doing. And so it's really easy to kind of look at some other options and things other people are doing. And then you start, you kind of start going away from I don't know if you want to say a singular focus, but something you're focused on, and start jumping into too many different things. And that's what I didn't want to do. I kind of found my groove, and I said, hey, this is being really successful. Let's continue on this as long as we can. So.
Yeah, there's definitely so many. You can go Airbnb, you can do other vacation rentals, you can flip homes, but you found your niche and have been very successful. So, man, congratulations! I'm so proud of you.
Yeah, I appreciate it, man. I love sharing the info. I think it's it's just something that I really think can help change your life in a positive way. And again, it's real estate isn't for everybody, but I think if you can get into it and find some good deals, you'll find it can change things pretty significantly for you, and especially down the road,
All right, guys. Well, I know you got to get out of here. I got to go get my COVID shot. So I'm going to
Congrats.
call it a wrap as well, but I appreciate it. Thanks everybody for joining. And until next time, go build some passive income sources, go get vaccinated. And as always, stay greedy.
Follow Greed Geek on Twitter and Facebook at Greed Geek, and follow on Twitch at Greed Geek TV.